Hello, today we're going to be finding out about the Great Fire of London. We're going to be finding out about how many houses were destroyed. We're going to be finding out how many people were homeless. We're going to think about what happened to those people, whether or not they made it through, whether or not their houses were burned down, what happened to them if their houses were burnt down, how they actually survived the fire. Now, the Great Fire of London happened in 1666, and it's called the Great Fire of London because it was so big. It wasn't great, fantastic, it was great as in big. The reason it was so big was all the buildings were wooden and they burnt really, really well. They even managed to burn down buildings that weren't wooden because of the fire being so hot. It happened in September of 1666. It hadn't rained since March. That's a long time without any water. All the trees were crackled and dry. There was nothing growing at all. All the roofs of the houses were mainly thatched. And thatched roofs are made out of straw and they are very, very easy to catch fire. There were other problems too. The buildings in the City of London were made out of wood. And if you leave wood out in the garden for any length of time, you'll notice it goes a bit mouldy and soggy and starts to rot. So the people of the City of London would paint their walls and their wood with tar to stop it from actually rotting. Now, it did work really, really well, but the problem with tar is it's like petrol. So if you've just covered your wooden building in something that's made out of the same stuff as petrol, and you've got a roof that's made out of straw and it hasn't rained since March, you've got a fire hazard. And if you've got thousands and thousands of those buildings together, you've got the origins of the Great Fire of London. Now, these houses are really close together. You can shake hands through your top windows with the people who live opposite. They're that close. Some of them are so close you can't get a horse and cart down. Some of them are so close that a person can stand in the middle and put their arms on either side of the walls. So they're really close together. So that means that fire can jump quite easily as well. So why did the fire start? Everybody knows it started in Pudding Lane, and it started in the baker's shop in Pudding Lane. Now, Thomas Fariner, the baker, he was the king's baker, so he was an important person. Had a very good name for being a baker. Fariner means person who works with flour in French, so it was absolutely perfect. So Thomas the baker lived in Pudding Lane and he had an oven that looked a bit like a pizza oven. It was sort of like an igloo shape, made out of bricks covered in clay, and it had a door at the front. Now, the way that you actually make those hot is you fill them full of twigs and you set them on fire. The inside of that oven gets really glowing red hot. And when it's red hot, you scrape out all of the old ashes and you put in your bread. And it cooks really, really quickly, just like a pizza oven. But there's a problem. Have you ever seen a bonfire? When you see a bonfire at night, you see little tiny sparks going up into the sky and then they disappear. Now, if you open the door to that oven, a little tiny spark could come out. One little tiny spark. Now, if you're outside, that doesn't matter. But if it touches something and starts to burn, it could start a fire. Now, if Thomas Fariner had seen that little tiny spark, he could have put it out. If that tiny little spark had gone to the floor and started to burn on the floor, someone could have stepped on it and put it out. But if you've ever used flour, you will know that it goes everywhere. Into big clouds, it settles on everything. Now, Thomas Fariner was the king's baker. He used loads of flour, big, big sacks. And when you get loads of flour and you open it up in a big sack, lots and lots of dust, lots and lots of flower dust. And if that little spark catches one little bit of dust, it will go and get bigger. And if that little flame catches another bit of dust, and it will, because there's lots of it, that will go too. And it will get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until boom! Suddenly, you've got a raging inferno. You've got a dust explosion. And these still happen today. You've got to be very careful with flour wherever you use it. So, Thomas Fariner, he's suddenly in a shop downstairs and everything's on fire. There's been an explosion. His windows have gone out. There's flames everywhere. What does he do? Thomas runs upstairs. He runs upstairs and he wakes up his family, and they can't get downstairs again because downstairs is completely alight. They open their windows and they crawl out of their window and into their neighbour's house. But this is where we get the first death in the Great Fire of London. Thomas Fariner's maid was too scared to come across one roof to the other roof and through the window. And she was the first person to die in the Great Fire of London. Well, there it is. It's alight. There's a wind blowing and it's catching really, really fast. Little tiny flames are going from roof to roof. They called the Lord Mayor, and his name was Sir Thomas Bloodworth. So Thomas Bloodworth was got out of bed at the Mansion House, which is a great big house with lots of columns in the centre of the city, and he was told to come down because there was a fire in Pudding Lane, and what they needed to do was to pull down all the houses around it to stop the fire from spreading. Now, Thomas was very, very grumpy. He got out of his bed on that Sunday night, Monday morning, went to the fire, looked at it and went, an old lady could wee on that and it would go out. And he went home. Now, there's no way, not even if you had a whole room full of old ladies, could you have put out that fire. So the fire kept burning and the wind was blowing it and blowing it. The first night, it blew it all the way down Pudding Lane, and then it blew it towards the wharves, the front of the river. The wharves are the places where you store all your goods, and inside those big warehouses were things like gunpowder and brandy and more flour and silk and lots of other things that burn really well and actually explode. And by the time they got down to the riverside, boom, the whole of the front of the riverside was alight, and the Great Fire of London had really got started. The wind changed direction. It started to blow away from the river and north. And at that point, lots and lots of houses and streets start to burn. In the end, 70,000 out of the 80,000 people who lived in the City of London had lost their homes because this wind was blowing so fast and so hard. It was just a curtain of flame going north, and it went further and further and further across the city until it reached St Paul's Cathedral. Now, St Paul's Cathedral is the oldest and biggest and most beautiful building in the whole of the City of London. It's over 1,000 years old. It's beautiful. But because it's old, even though it's made out of stone, it's covered in scaffolding, wooden scaffolding. And when the fire hits that wooden scaffolding, it burns. And it burns all the way up to the roof. Now, you can have a look on YouTube at the way Notre Dame in Paris burned and how the roof fell in, and see exactly what happened, because that cathedral is the same age as the old St Paul's Cathedral. So, the roof is made out of something called lead, and it melts at quite a low temperature, about 900 degrees, which is quite low for metal. And the roof melts and sheets of metal fall to the ground. Just puddles of molten metal everywhere. The whole of St Paul's Cathedral is alight. And the king is furious because half of his city is now alight, and the wind is changing direction again, and it's going towards the west. It's going to where the West End of London is today, and Westminster, and the Palace of Westminster, which is where the king lives. And he's absolutely furious. Why has nobody done anything? Him and his brother come out. They try and find Bloodworth, the mayor, to ask him why he hasn't been pulling down buildings. And one of the reasons he didn't want to do that was the buildings that needed pulling down were quite rich people's buildings, and he didn't want to upset them, but they're on fire anyway. The king and his brother set to with some of their servants. They bring gunpowder, they bring hooks to pull down buildings, and they start blowing up whole streets. Boom! Streets going. And suddenly there is a gap. It's called a fire break between half of the city that's still on fire and the other half that isn't. And any little tiny spark that gets there, they can get one of the leather buckets that they use for putting out fires and just throw that over the sparks. And so they stopped half of the city of London from being burned. How hot was this fire? Well, Samuel Pepys says that when birds flew above the fire, some of them just burst into flames and fell to the ground. The day after the fire finished, on the Thursday the 6th of September, it went from the Sunday the 2nd to Thursday the 6th. It's a very big fire. The day after, the pavements were still so hot, there were puddles of molten lead on the floor. And if you tried to walk across those pavements to get to your house to see if there was anything left, your shoes would catch fire. So, at the end of this, 70,000 families, 70,000 people have lost their homes. Where do they go? They live in tents in places like Lincoln Fields and Islington Fields, and they need to find the rest of their family because people ran in all directions, trying to carry what they could and hold up hands with their children, because those little tiny narrow streets meant you couldn't carry much. And if you let go of your mum or your dad's hand, you'd be lost forever. So what we do today is we put out something on Twitter. We'd write a blog and say, have you seen my auntie? She got lost in the fire, or we've lost everything. Could you send us some money? If anybody's got any spare clothes, or could you lend us a room in your house because we are living in a tent in the middle of Islington Fields and we're really, really cold because it's September. People would do that today. But in 1666, they didn't have the internet. They didn't have Twitter. They didn't have Instagram. They couldn't make a TikTok explaining that they've lost everything. So what they did was they made a broadsheet. And a broadsheet was one piece of paper, and anybody could print a broadsheet and you'd sell it for a penny, so you'd be getting some money back. And you put in it your story. And that's what we're going to do now. We are going to make our own broadsheet, and it's ever so easy. We're going to do our own version of that printed piece of paper that tells us exactly what we think's happened, what's happened to us, whether or not our house has burned down, who we think did it, who we think's to blame, who we think are the heroes of the hour. Do we say, oh, the firemen were amazing? Or do we say, oh, Bloodworth, if only he hadn't been so rude at the start and just pulled down some houses, it would have been the fire of Pudding Lane and it would never have happened? Or do we say, the king, wasn't he amazing? All of these things we can put into our broadsheet, and we can even put in a little plea for some money if we've got just a tent to live in now. So, first thing we need to do is to get our grid. Each little section of our grid we will fill in 2-minute sections. The way this is going to happen is I'm going to show you what to write, and you can write that in one square of your grid. Then you choose who you're going to be, and whoever you're going to be, that tells you where you're going to be living. First of all, decide who you are going to be. Are you going to be Thomas Farriner? Are you going to be Mrs. Farriner? Are you going to be Fireman Sam? Or Mayor Bloodworth? Or the King? You decide. And when you've decided that, we're going to do our first square. In square number 1, we're going to start off with my name is. Write that in square number 1. You can see it's written there on the slide. And then I'd like you to do a picture of you. I've given you some examples and you've got 2 minutes to do this. Whilst this is happening, we'll give you some music to listen to and some pictures to look at for some inspiration. But you've only got 2 minutes. Don't think about it too much, just get on with it. My name is, and decide who you're going to be. Go. You've done the first square and only the first square. In square number 2, we've got to decide where we're living. So if you're Thomas Farriner, you're going to be living in the bakery. If you are Mayor Bloodworth, you're going to be living in the mansion house with big columns and it's going to look beautiful. If you are the fireman Sam, they're all called Sam, you are going to be living in a normal house. And if you're the king, you're going to be living in a palace. So, in square number 2, put I live in a, and then write where you live and do a picture. You've got another 2 minutes. Go. All finished? Great. In square number 3, we're going to think about our feelings. The Great Fire of London made people feel lots of different things. They were frightened, they were angry, they were scared, they were sad. Some people might have been excited, especially if they were firemen, because they were doing their job in a very exciting situation. So, in square number 3, we are going to put I felt, and we're going to think about how you would have felt when St. Paul's Cathedral burnt down. You might have felt very, very scared if you thought it was your fault. You might have felt sad. You might have felt angry because St. Paul's Cathedral was the most important building in the whole city. You might have felt excited because you were doing your job well. Decide how you would have felt and write it in box number 3 and then do a picture of your face. Go. Okay, has everybody finished how they're feeling? Great. So for our next square, we're now deciding, who do we blame? Whose fault is it? Is it Thomas Farriner's? The fire started in his shop. Is it Mayor Bloodworth? Well, he could have got it put out much, much quicker. Is it the King's fault? Is it the fireman's fault for not being good enough fireman? You decide who's to blame. And in box number 4, I want you to write, I blame, decide who to blame, put their name in, and then do a picture of them. You've got 2 minutes. Go. Now, once you've blamed everybody, you might want to tell people who you think is a hero. If you are Mrs. Farriner, you might think that Thomas, your husband, is a hero because he saved your family's lives. You might say that the King is a hero because he stopped half of the city from burning. If you're Mayor Bloodworth, perhaps you think that you're the hero. Or you might think that the firemen are heroes. You decide who your hero is. And in box number 5, I want you to put, my hero is, then write the name of your hero, and then do a picture of them. You have another 2 minutes. Go. For your final box, after the whole of the fire has happened, you've got to decide, did your house burn down? Well, let me tell you, obviously, the bakery burned down. Mayor Bloodworth's mansion burned down. The palace didn't burn down. And some houses didn't burn down. Lots of them did, but not all of them. So, if you are the Fariners, you might be living in a tent. If you are Mayor Bloodworth, you might be living in a tent. If you're the king, you're still in that palace. If you're Fireman Sam, you might still be in your house, or you might be in a tent. But if you are a person who has been blamed for the fire, you might be in prison. So, you decide where you're living now. And I want you to write, now I live in a, and then put where you're living and put a picture. Off you go, final 2 minutes, go. So, now we've done our broadsheet. You have who you are, where you live, how you felt when St Paul's Cathedral was burnt to the ground. We've got who you're blaming for this terrible thing, and we've got who your hero is. And we now know where you're living and whether or not you need help. You can use this to make a proper story where you can actually write lots of different things, put in more details about how you escaped from the fire, whether or not you took part in a bucket chain to put out fires. Lots of different things that you can do. I hope that you've enjoyed this. Thank you.